Guys. No, I'm good. Thank you. I'm trying to get you a little bit of coffee. What's wrong with this audio visual stuff here?
But you might be unplugged out here.
Oh yeah, man, I'm unplugged. Thank you. There we go. All right, guys, we will get going here. I can pull the whiteboard over if I need to write down what the different ideas are, but I wanted to kind of survey the group and talk a little bit about what you might want to hear about tonight if you were here last week. Was it last week we did? I did the lecture on grief. Yes. That was pretty freaking heavy duty, wasn't it? Yes. So we did that, and if you've been coming, we usually do something on what is addiction, kind of the brain, and how does it affect what substance use disorder, how does it affect the person, and subsequently what are the best ways to talk to a person. And I'll go over some of that, but does anybody have any burning desire issues that they're dealing with that they want to hear about or they want to talk about? Anything that I can help you figure out?
volunteer one. You know, what do you do, how do you personally, me, cope with not having heard from my addict for a while? I mean, I was okay with it, and now I'm starting to worry. So, does anybody else have that?
Here, I'll let you talk to mine.
No, I don't want yours.
So,
But I mean,
so
he's-
you get,
how do you deal with that, all the doubt and the fear and the anxiety and the worry and all of that comes in when you don't hear from them?
so the situation is such that the person left your house,
Yes,
because he needed to.
yes,
It's a he, right?
yes.
Had to leave,
Gone.
wasn't working, absolutely unacceptable situation, he goes. And now that he's gone, you're not hearing from him for, how long's it been?
It's been 3 weeks.
So 3 weeks go by and you don't hear from the person, that's going to create, first of all, we have to acknowledge something. It's almost impossible for that not to create anxiety and worry. Would you guys agree with that? It's nearly impossible to not go through anxiety and worry. So the question for the group and ultimately for me is, how do you deal with that? Anxiety, worry, fear, sleepless nights, whatever you want to call it. How do you deal with that if you haven't heard from the person? Really, you could push that out further and say, how do you deal with that in general? Because maybe it's not about this particular issue, but we know that what comes with addiction and what comes with family members dealing with addiction, it's defined by anxiety, worry, and fear. How do you deal with that uncertainty when you're kind of waiting for the call, or you're not even waiting for the call, you're just wondering what's going on? Does anyone have any experience that they would share regarding that situation? Or anything, any sage advice that they would have? Because this is a key part of the equation. As people start to make decisions on how they want to set boundaries, and you know the ultimate boundary a lot of times is we can no longer live together. We just can't live together. And as people approach that, one of the things they think about is, either consciously or subconsciously, how am I going to deal with the fact that they're not here? The devil I know is better than the devil I don't know. So once they're out on the street and I'm not hearing from them and I don't know where they are, how am I going to deal with that? So this is absolutely something that's part of the process, without question. And I'll talk a little bit about worry and anxiety in general. But before I do that, does anyone have any kind of advice or feedback for that issue? Yes.
I think it's something very personal, and the way I handle it is not going to be the way you do. But make sure that not to put yourself down, because we all go through it. And I personally, I prayed a lot, and I'm praying in general. It's nothing, that he be okay, that he be all right. I wasn't thinking of not doing drugs or not in jail. I was just saying,
Just be
okay.
safe.
Just be safe, be okay. And eventually, mine was like only a few days, not 2 weeks. I don't know. I was about to start calling hospitals and police stations and find out if there was any report, anything. And
So the goal, the first thing you have to do is define the goal. The first thing you do in any situation when you're talking about something like anxiety or worry is you kind of ask yourself, is this normal to the situation? You guys have heard me before use the term affect appropriate to situation. That means that you feel a certain way based on the circumstances, and any reasonable human would feel that way based on the circumstances. And that's how you know you're not crazy. Do you guys get that?
Is this normal?
So now normalization in and of itself isn't the answer altogether. Normalization isn't the answer altogether, but I will tell you, normalization can be a big step in the process. There's something about knowing that my response is normal and I'm kind of going through what anyone in my shoes would go through. So you kind of talk yourself through that. It sounds like you already understand that. You've been coming to this group. Then the second part of it is, how do you deal with it on a daily basis? And I'll sort of just give you some hints and some tips that I would suggest that you can put into practice immediately if this is an issue you're dealing with. Okay, so the first thing is try to get an understanding of, are there any patterns to your worry? Well, let me go back. First, get into an understanding of what your symptoms of your worry, and what it does to you, and how do you know that you're even in that bad space? Is it a panic attack? Can you not breathe? Is it that you can't leave the house? Is it affecting your work? You have to define like what the problem is with the worry. Do you understand what I'm saying? Because let's get on the record. Worry in and of itself is not a problem. So maybe you shouldn't not worry, is what I'm saying. You have to define what the problem is in order to know what the solution is. Does this make sense? The idea that you're not going to worry that's not true for anyone in any part of life. The question is, what's it doing to you, and what do you want to be different?
Can you be worrying and not know it? So, but you have all these other things that you're doing because you're worrying, but you're not identifying that you're doing them because you're worrying?
Yeah, so if you get real honest about it, the deal is that some people in your shoes will deal with it in self-destructive ways. Okay, so, and what do I mean by self-destructive ways? Varying gradations of self-destructive ways. One would be they don't leave the house. They isolate. They don't go anywhere. Maybe they stay in bed the whole time. Another would be they're lashing out at people at work because they're just in a bad mood and they're walking around and they're wired out and they're at a 7 or an 8 and they're just ready to lose it. A third example would be people start drinking or using drugs themselves to cope. Do you follow me? So there's these different gradations of anxiety and worry. And you have to ask yourself, is that happening, or is there something going on in my life that I want to be different? Because if you can identify that, then you can actually get to a point where you start to say, am I making a difference? Guys, one of the biggest things about addiction and recovery services, and for that matter, mental health services, is we speak in these splendid generalities. What's the goal for the patient, Rich? To reduce anxiety and worry. What does that mean? How do you even know if that's done? And so for each one of us, we have to look and say, here's what I wanted to have different. I want to stop. I want to be able to sleep at night. I want to be able to sleep at night. Now you got a goal. Okay? I want to stop. Yelling at my other kids because I'm so aggravated with what's going on with my other son. I'm making all this up, but once you get the goal, then you can work on what you would want to have different. So, do you have any goal in that area, or do you want to think about that for a while? Because I can just go on with an example.
Yeah, I'm going to think about it.
So an example, probably the classic example would be this stuff is just eating my lunch. I cannot concentrate at work. I'm not really sleeping at night. I'm just not myself. I'm losing weight because I'm not eating. It's usually something like that. Okay, so this is manifesting itself in these self-destructive behaviors, and I'd like to be able to have, a normal day every once in a while. That's something you'll hear people say. And if you're in a therapy session, and we're doing a therapy session, what I would say to that is well, so can you put a number on that? Let's go on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 is I'm absolutely miserable. I cannot get out of the bed. I just want to go smoke crack cocaine. You can laugh, guys. Come on. Unless that's what you're into, then we have to talk in another group. Okay, so 1 is absolutely horrible. 10 is completely freed up, happy, joyous, free, that kind of thing. All right? Where do you put yourself? People are usually like, I'm a 3. Okay? I'm a 3. Well, what would you take? If I could get to a 5, I would be okay. All right? Now, what would it take to get you to a 5? I'd like to be able to sleep 4 out of 7 days a week. Do you follow me? Now you start getting into some goals that you can start to follow. You can start to actually measure your progress. The problem is, guys, if you're not measuring your progress, you're talking in ways that are absolutely unachievable. There is no way to do it. There really, really is no solution to this that involves doing certain things and you are set free from this issue. Do you guys understand that? That's not how anxiety and worry work. I shouldn't have said that, because if it was working for you, I just blew it. typically speaking, it's something you have to work on an ongoing basis. So that would just be, so first you figure out, like, I want to sleep. If I slept 4 nights a week, or if I went from getting 3 hours of sleep to 5 hours of sleep, I'd be happy, that kind of thing. All right, so now what are some of the things that you can do? Another thing you'll hear people talk about with worry and anxiety is they'll actually start to try to identify a couple different things. One are there any certain triggers that get you going? In your case, without hearing from your son, it's not going to be talking to him, obviously, but it could be certain music or certain days. You know, certain weather situations will trigger a memory or trigger a situation. Certain TV shows will trigger a situation. Are there any things that kind of get you going, for lack of a better term? The other thing that's interesting is, are there any certain times of the day where worry seems to be worse? So the most common thing is nighttime. Nighttime tends to be the time when people, you say, don't talk about this after 8 p.m. Do not talk about this issue after 8 p.m. If you have somebody if your husband, wife, friend, confidant, whatever it is, you do not need to be talking about this after 8 p.m. Maybe even earlier than that. You start to make those kind of rules. Now, are there certain days of the week? You're starting to get a pattern. How do you even know you're worrying? Is it that you worried right now on the way into the group, or is it that you were worrying all day? You track your worry. Does that make sense? So you actually know where you're at with it. Here's what you find when people do this. If you do like a long-term approach with somebody, I can't do this anymore. I just don't do this in where I'm at in my life and with what we got going on with Favor. But when I would meet with people for, months and months, 18 months, 2 years and things, it was very, very, very common. They actually weren't worrying all day. They really weren't. But the episodes of worry that they were having were so intense and so uncomfortable that it characterized the whole day. Does that make sense? So they would come see me and we would sit down and we would start talking about worry, and they were very, very worried then, or they had a very bad afternoon, and that flavored the whole conversation. Sometimes people were lifted up by the idea that they were actually doing a little bit better than they thought they were doing with this type of issue. So you get a baseline. It's called a baseline. You get a baseline idea of what's going on. Is this all right? Because I'm going way into this. Is this cool? Okay. Because what a lot of people would say is just, let it go. Let go and let God. Like somebody, like that is not a solution to this issue. That may be part of the solution, but that's, when people used to say that to me, I used to say, how do I do that? And they would say, well, you let go and let God. And I said, well, how do I do that? And it was like a circular conversation. That's part of the solution, I would say, is letting go and letting God. All right, so you got that going on. You got a baseline. Now you know where you're at. Second thing would be to start to develop 2 different columns. One is preventative. What are the preventative actions I can take to deal with worry? And the other is called the immediate actions you can take to deal with worry. Preventative actions are things that you do on a daily basis to make it less likely that the worry is going to get the best of you. You do it whether you're worried or not. Does that make sense? You do it on a routine basis. Anybody have any ideas on what that could be? Exercise would be an example. Anyone else? Music. A prayer routine. This is where you start to see a lot of the practices that go along with the program. That's preventative work, is what's going on there. You're doing things every day, no matter what's going down, you're doing them, because what that does is that's conditioning your thinking in a certain direction, whether you're having a good day or a bad day. So exercise, all the stress management techniques, probably coming to a group like this. If you have a therapist, going to see a therapist would be part of that. If you have a good friend, spending some time with a good friend. The free 3, go outside, listen to music, laugh, all those things that you can do. That's called preventative. Anybody want to add to the preventative list? Yes?
I'll say volunteer, find you some volunteer opportunities. I do that a lot, and that helps me, 'cause it takes my mind. When I'm helping somebody else, I'm not worried about my own issues.
So there's definitely something, and this is immediate and preventative in a way. I would say volunteering would be preventative, but this idea of distracting yourself. If you look at what people talk about worry and anxiety, the very first thing at the top of any of the immediate lists is distract yourself. do not sit in the worry, because it's gonna keep on that cycle. So the idea would be get involved in something, get busy with something, whatever it may be. It may be an important project, it may not be an important project, but it's this idea, if your mind is occupied on this thing, maybe the worry can't grab you. That's under the immediate column. A couple other things under the immediate column would be call somebody. What happens when you call somebody? Now you have to call the right person, right? You have to call the right person. What's the right person or the right type of person? What do I mean by that? What's that?
A listener.
So somebody's going to listen. You're not going to call the person and go, "Can I talk to you for a minute? I got some stuff going on." They're like, "I'm so glad you called. Let me tell you what's happening." And then they talk for 45 minutes. You don't want that. It's somebody who knows you're calling and they're going to give you support. This is very important. This person needs to know they're getting the call so that they can be the helper. So it may not be a friend. It may not be a family member. It might have to be a coach, or it might have to be a sponsor from Al-Anon, or somebody else that you can trust. They have to know they're getting the call and that they're on the receiving end or they're on the giving end and you're on the receiving end. So that's making a phone call. The other thing that happens when you make a phone call is you are now occupying your mind as well, processing it a little bit. So talking about it helps. A couple other things with immediate kind of interventions. We've talked about reframing things. We've talked about not trying to paint with the worst case scenario when any of this stuff is going down, and talking to your internal voice. Now we can talk about your situation, and there's nothing good about it, and there's no one that can sit here and say, like, he's okay, don't worry about it. There's nothing realistic about that. But at the same time, we know the facts. The facts are he left your house, right? Did you have to ask him to leave?
Yeah.
He was probably he's probably not real happy about that, right?
Well, he left, I had to evict him, but we left on fairly good terms.
But you had to evict him,
Yeah.
which definitely indicates that this is, I mean, if you
It
left...
was bad.
So in other words, he wasn't leaving to kind of go out and be like, "Hey, Mom, I'll see you later."
No.
He was leaving under pretty bad conditions.
Yeah.
So you could not be hearing from him because something happened, but you could also not be hearing from him because he's like, "Screw that, I'm not talking to her."
Well, he called me to let me know he'd arrived, and he called me to let me know he'd gotten to his second destination, and that's it. He called me because he was worried because he hadn't been able to secure a job. Where he went, he was hoping he was going to get a job, and he hadn't been able to find that yet. So I'm feeling, maybe I'm making it up.
No, but
We make things up?
no, it could be intuitive,
But
but
intuitively, I'm feeling like, there's a trigger there for him, and it's,
intuitively you're feeling, when you say there's a trigger there, you mean it's not good.
it's not good.
Yeah,
That's what I'm feeling, and
Yeah.
that's why it's kind of creeping in. So triggers for me are the color of his car,
okay.
okay? And then just today, he had a chair that he sat in the kitchen at the table, and I said, "Damn it, I'm gonna get this chair out of here."
Yeah.
Because every time I looked at it, it brought all of that back, and so I moved the chair.
Yeah,
Yay!
yeah,
Just stuff like that that's going on.
absolutely.
But it's subliminal. I mean, those are triggers for me.
Yeah, they definitely, they get you going.
Everybody has them, right?
Yes. So you could try to challenge your thinking, but at the same time, if you're dealing with a bad situation, you're dealing with a bad situation. Nobody can color it another way and say there's nothing there to worry about. I mean, it absolutely could be that. A couple other things that you can do, and this is tough, and this is something that you might do through a guided session if you have a therapist or whatever, but you can confront, we talked about this last week, that anticipatory anxiety and that anticipatory grief and that fear of what could happen. And there's this concept or this idea of fear setting where you look it in the eye and you say, okay, this could be going on, and I'm going to literally like sit in this, and I'm going to see if I get used to this at all. The worst case scenario has happened. Now this is the kind of thing that you don't necessarily do in a group like this. You usually do it in a one-on-one session, but it's this idea of once you're in that emotional pain and you're there for a moment, that it might lessen. It won't get comfortable, but it might lessen. And is it the fear of confronting that thought and you can kind of take control of that part of it. How do people do that? They usually do that in a therapy session through a thing called guided meditation or guided practice, that kind of deal. Otherwise, your only other options would be what? I guess you could go try to find them. We've discussed that that's not necessarily a really good idea, right?
No, I'm not gonna do that.
So you're not going to do that.
No.
You'd have to try to be gentle with yourself and get through the day the best you can, and understand that it might not mean that you're overjoyed with the situation, but can you get through and can you have a reasonable day? What's the goal? A reasonable day. Not necessarily, euphoria and yippee, but a reasonable day. What other thoughts around this issue? What other ideas or thoughts around dealing with the anxiety and the worry associated with not knowing?
Well, there's a lot of guilt that you feel because there is something else that you could have done, something else you should have done.
Guilt is something.
Yes.
So guilt is definitely comes with the package. Every time I've talked to anybody, guilt will be there. Guilt does tend to go away over time. I will tell you that as you get educated with these groups and you start to learn about this, guilt really subsides over time. So we would say if you're going through that right now, if you keep coming back here, and also as the person gets older, here's the other part of the reality. Guilt is a lot more powerful when the kid is like 22 or 23 than when he's 40. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
The guilt thing starts to change. I can tell you that I don't know everyone's situation, but this isn't about what you can do and what you can't do. If you're here and you've been coming for a reasonable period of time, you have probably explored most everything that you can do. And remember, we did that chart last week where we talked about the 4 different options and kind of like where you can go with it. You're probably further along in helping than you think. Yeah. I've said this the last several. At the end of the day, there's just there's nothing else to do. Does that make sense? You literally run out of options. I really wish it wasn't that way. Yes.
I tell myself that if anything really bad happened, I would have got a phone call. And that's how I feel it every day. Something bad happened, I would have got a phone call.
So I'm not going to sit here and dwell on this, because if something bad happens, I'm going to get a call. You construct this and you say, here's how I'm going to deal with this. So prayer absolutely works. The let go and let God thing comes into that part of the process where even saying a prayer in the moment, dear God, take this from me. Dear God, help me with this. That's where I think the let go and let God part comes in, but you have to do it over and over and over again. What other comments on that? Yes, Carol.
Along the same line as her, my daughter had so many overdoses and surgeries that I got to the point that I just said, well, she's not dead right now,
Yeah,
and she may not die.
right.
We've been through this before, she did not die. And I would just say that like over and over and over like a mantra to me,
Yeah.
so that I could just get through that moment.
You could go through. You can go through and ask yourself, what can I do different? Can I do anything different? To your point, have you done everything? You can ask yourself that question and try to figure that out. I think at a certain point in time, you have to say, I have, and then you start to say, how do we deal with this? What do we do? I was listening to a podcast on the way back from Pittsburgh, and it was this guy was talking about dealing with his daughter who had this very unusual case of rheumatoid. Why can't I say that word? Rheumatoid. Thank you. Rheumatoid arthritis, and very, very mysterious. Couldn't figure out why it was happening, and excruciating pain, and basically a death sentence is what they were saying. It was just deteriorating bones, things over and over. And the guy was talking about his process of trying to help her, and how excruciating it was to watch this happen, and taking her to all these doctors, and taking her to all these people, and the pain with that, and how did he deal with it? Okay, this was the question: how did you deal with this? The person interviewing him, how did you deal with this? And he said, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm not going to make this any worse. I'm not going to make this any worse for her. So this is horrible for her. I'm not going to make it any worse. So I'm not going to blame myself. I'm not going to blame her mother. We're not going to fight about this. I'm not going to get up in my head. I'm not going to try to solve all these problems and do all these things that I can't. She's going to stay at my house. The doctor's going to do the best they can. I'm not going to make it worse. And I'm going to do everything I can on any given day to help her out. Now, in that case, it was kind of moving her around the house, helping her physically. And then that's where I heard the 8 o'clock thing. And then at 8 o'clock, I'm done and I'm shutting it off. Because if I don't get any sleep and I don't start taking care of myself, I'm not going to be there for my kid tomorrow. Now, this is a little different than what you're dealing with, because you setting boundaries is being there for your kid. This is so important for us to understand. There is no doubt that the best thing you can do for your child is to set boundaries on. That is the best thing that you can do to help the person. Do you understand that? Is to say, you can't live at my house right now. Now, what we believe is you don't have to be tough about it. We don't believe you got to be mean. If your son called you tomorrow and said you want to get lunch, you're allowed to get lunch in our world. So other people would tell you, don't do that. Just cut them off altogether unless they're in rehab or something. I don't believe in that. I do, without question, believe that boundaries set by parents and set by spouses is part of the person getting better. It's just the evidence is overwhelming in that regard. So you are doing everything you can do, but you're bearing the pain of it. You're bearing the pain of it. Yes?
I think that part of the time, I don't know if I intentionally did this, but I think I was, for lack of a better word, sucking it up and just walking through the pain, just sitting with it for a while, and because there was nothing else I could do. So, and it got better, but sometimes I just had to be there.
And not make it worse.
Yeah.
Do you guys know what I mean by make it worse? There's all kinds of different ways you can make this worse. Do you guys know that, right? Like, you could go out, get in your car right now, go get him, and put him in an apartment, or bring him to your house. You know what I mean? You could make it worse. So the first thing is, don't make it worse. How else can you make it worse? You can allow this issue to run your life to where it affects your other relationships. You can act out on people. The uncomfortability of the situation can lead you to lash out on people and fracture other relationships.
I was just gonna say, I think we react, when we are first into this, trying to figure it all out, we try this and that and this and that. We drive ourselves crazy at the beginning, and it's like you don't have any control over that. You're just trying the next thing, whatever will work, whatever works. And then finally, I'm probably three years into this thing now, and I've tried pretty much everything, and he's gonna have to do it himself.
Right.
But I think at the beginning, we get all caught up in that, and it about drove me crazy too, I can admit, but now I'm not quite like that now. So over time, it's changed.
No, and I do think you're absolutely right. The longer you're exposed to this, the more you change, no doubt. And how many different times can you try different things?
Right.
And the one thing you can control is yourself. And the one thing you can control is your response to the situations, and how you can you treat the world okay despite what is happening. And that would be the idea of not making it worse. That would be the idea of kind of suffering through this with some dignity, but also with your eye. And let's talk about this. If you don't believe this, let's talk through and see if this is something that we can help you understand. So, family systems theory. This is not Rich Jones's theory. This isn't something that I made up. It's probably the most widely accepted school of thought around marriage and family therapy. And it goes like this. It's this idea that in any system, and a family is a system is a series of parts, right? Mom, dad, brother, that kind of thing. That people fall into roles and behaviors and ways of doing things and unspoken expectations that guide the system for better or for worse. And it guide the behaviors, the good stuff and the bad. And that if you can change one part of the system, you can change the whole entire system. And as you start to change your responses to circumstances, even if they're small, I'm gonna tell you something right now. If you change, let's say for example, that your response to suspected use on the part of your loved one is to blast them. That's your response. I'm pretending that that would ever happen. Right? You know what I mean by that? You're using, I know you're high. I could tell by your text message. I could tell by your smile. I can read your thoughts. You're thinking about getting high if you're not high yet. You know what I mean? So it's like you let them have it. If that's your pattern, one of the things you can do tonight is change that pattern and not say anything the next time it goes down. Just simply don't say anything. And then don't say anything the next time, and don't say anything the next time. And you are now changing your response, and this person is going to start to get uncomfortable because it's not what they're used to. So now, will they start to change? If you take their phone call every time they call and they say jump and you say how high, practice not doing that starting tonight. If you can't not take it at all, don't take it the first 150 times. Take it on the 150. You guys ever get the hammer text in the calls? Boom, 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 boom. Pick it up. I'm out of toilet paper. Why did you get that for me, man? I'm out of toilet paper. You didn't care about me. Exaggerating a little bit. Just a little bit, right? I mean, just a little bit. And, so you start to change your response. And if you don't have to go from 0 to 60. You don't have to go, you don't have to go from I haven't done anything to like I'm going home tonight and just ripping the Band-Aid off. You start to change, and the idea would be is it starts to subtly influence the other person. Now, I will say this. I understand where you are in the world today with some of the dangerous substances that are out there that have changed the game a little bit. And it's harder to do this today than it's ever been. Because, what we see on TV and what we know is happening, that it has this sense of urgency where we feel like we can't change ourselves, we have to change the person. To your point, like, we can't work on ourselves because look what's going on out there. I'm telling you, I get it. So try to change them, but if they don't, the only thing you're left with is changing yourself. Linda, did you ever hand up?
Well, I'm using that technique of not saying anything. We just had a family get-together for a birthday, and my addict came. And it took a lot of courage for him to come and be with the family. And about half of my family welcomed him, high-fived him, we bowled, we had some laughs, we had fun. And the other half of my family just kind of stood back and...
Yeah. Gave him the evil eye. Gave him the iron gaze.
And I thought, well, I could just really be pissed about all that.
Yeah.
And I thought, no.
Yeah.
He's got to earn their respect, earn something.
Would you typically, in the past, would you have jumped in there and tried to do something about that?
To some,
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah. Well, and that's
But
a good...
I'm not saying a word now.
Yeah, you're changing your pattern of behavior. You're changing your pattern of behavior. You're trying to instill something else coming out of this by changing your response.
Right.
I mean, I've told you guys the story over and over again, and it's as true as I'm standing here, that one of the hallmark points in my recovery was when my wife stopped confronting me. And I don't know if somebody told her to do that or it just naturally happened. I suspect she got some advice around that. But I had gotten in a car accident, and we had the kids in the car, and we're in a minivan, because that's how I roll. I drive a minivan and listen to gangster rap. That's what it was like back in the day. And I get in a car accident. He's looking at me like, oh my God. So I get in a car accident, and the kids were in the car. It was horrible. It was one of those nights. And it was New Year's Eve, so I still wind up drinking and doing my thing, and I'm passed out by 10:30. Awful night. One of the worst nights of my life in terms of shameful behavior. Does that make sense? Things that I regret to this day. My wife, we get in the car the next day, and what do I suspect? What do I expect? I expect, here we go, let's go at it. Let's have the fight. Let's do our thing. And she doesn't say anything. And we drive an hour and a half from where we were. We were outside of Pittsburgh, into Pittsburgh to our home, and she doesn't say anything the whole time. And it freaked me out. And if you'd have had a camera on me, what you would have seen is me arguing with myself. Literally, taking up her side of the argument and then taking up my side of the argument. Taking up her side of the argument and taking up my side. And trying so hard to get it going. Do you guys know what I mean by get it going? Have you ever been in a situation with your loved one where they want to have it pop off? And she didn't, and what that did was that's one of the hallmark moments where I remember, okay, this is getting different. There's something different here. I don't know what's going on. I don't like it. It's not comfortable. Even though it was conflictual before, it was conflictual in a way that I knew. Even though it was chaotic and dysfunctional, it was the dysfunction that I knew. Now you're doing something different. It's one of the reasons why, guys, one of the most common struggles for people in recovery and for their families is when they come out of rehab and they have to come back into the home, especially husbands and wives. This happens all the time. It's very hard to readjust back in the home because you've now gone to rehab and you've learned all these new skills and you've been taught all this new stuff and you're no longer using drugs, you're no longer drinking, and you come in the home and those old patterns and behaviors are now no longer part of the mix. So you have to relearn all that stuff. So that's what you're trying to do whenever you when you dig down into this. You're trying to change your behavior. Now, it's better if you can find other people who help you with that. Think of it as a baby's mobile. If you move one part, you move it all. Well, if you can have 2 or 3 parts that you can move, now you're going to get somewhere faster. What do I mean by that? That could be mom and dad need to work together. Maybe grandma needs to become involved. Maybe you need to do a map of the situation and say, who all's involved here? So you put the person in the middle and you say, who are the people close to them? Who else needs to get in on this conversation? Have you ever had the experience where there was an important person left out of the conversation? So maybe mom's upset, but the wife is okay in it. Maybe the wife's upset, but the mom is okay in it. You guys follow that? Who are the important people that need to be in this conversation and be at a group like this and get this information? That's the stuff you can work on. And here's the thing. There is no finish line. Do we all get that, right? You cannot be dipped in the waters of rehab and be, good to go. You've been told that. The world has told you that. TV shows have told you that. Some people have probably even told you that. We just got to get them in treatment. We just got to get them in treatment. Let's just get them in treatment. We got to get them in treatment. Call now. Call now. Call now. Got to get them in treatment. Got to get them in treatment. Call now. The idea is, there you go. The Holy Grail. Well, if you've been through this, you know that 30 days goes like that. Well, we're going to put him in sober living. What's sober living? That's where they're going to go, and maybe he'll have supervision, maybe he won't. He's 22 years old. He doesn't even know what he wants to do with himself. So who's going to have to be on the hook for this? Not the rehab staff. Not the sober living staff, not even FAVOR Greenville. Who's going to be on the hook? Mom and dad, husband and wife. This is why, to your point about I tried this and I tried this and I tried this, one of the most important things you can try is for yourself you need to become a detachment ninja. You need to become like a family recovery ninja, because that's the only thing that you have control of. And it's very uncomfortable to say because it sucks, because it doesn't solve the problem for the person. And the person is still out there in danger. Yes?
So, my problem is, and I think that my husband and I are sort of taking that step back, and we're no longer reacting, taking the calls, and my son has a girlfriend that he's told us last night that he wants to marry. She has no clue about his addiction.
Oh, wow, okay.
And what he's told her, and I had this discussion because I said, have you told her everything about your past? This is the way that, oh yeah, I said, what did you tell her? And he said, well, I told her that he's divorced since his rehab experience. He said, well, I told her that my past wife, our relationship was so bad that we got into drinking and bad food, and then I had to go in the hospital and was in the ICU. He was in the ICU for a while. He had such bad DTs that he almost died. And so that's what I told her. I said, did you tell her about your 6 weeks in Pavilion? And no. She doesn't need to know that. And so I said,
Man, it's
about marriage and kids, and I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And so I feel, I don't know what to do.
Man, it's a great question.
I just feel like she needs to know. But
So
don't know.
can I just give you some direct advice on
Yeah.
that? I would not go there.
Okay.
I would just stay out of that. Now, what I would do is, if he goes off the rails, and it gets bad again, then I do think you don't even necessarily need to go into great detail, but you got to have her on board if you're going to have to do anything. So what you have, I don't know if everyone could hear what she was talking about. It's this idea. It's complex, right? So the person's getting into a relationship. They have a history. I'm encouraging you not to become involved in that, because it's almost sort of like a premarital kind of counseling issue on what do you talk about, what do you not talk about. You definitely don't want to get in there, because that'll hurt your relationship with your son too.
Yeah, I think so.
And so that's one of the ones where the only thing you could really do is encourage him or give him some advice and say, man, that's something that I would want to know if I was her, that kind of thing. But you can't. You guys understand that getting involved involves. It doesn't necessarily. It involves what can you do? Who do you need to get on the team to help the person go get help? You don't want to get involved in their relationships at an intimate level. That's dangerous. You can go in there because you can get into all kinds of different stuff. You got too much on your hands then to try to figure that out. But you're absolutely right. Now his intentions could be really, truly, I'm not going to do it again. I'm done with that. That's part of my life back in the day, and I'm never going to. Why do I have to utter this out of my mouth? It's never going to happen again. And when people say that, they believe that. If you know anything about somebody who's dealt with addiction or gone through recovery themselves, when we say out loud, we're done. Hey, this isn't going to happen again. Many times we're 100% sincere.
I understand that.
Yeah.
But he's called inebriated now several times.
Oh, so he's already drinking.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
This is more of the problem, because I think one thing you can do is talk to her about the fact that he's drinking right now. You guys get that?
Okay.
You might say to yourself, what's the difference? The difference is you're not getting into their marriage at all. You're not trying to say, like, you need to share something from the past. What you're saying is, now my son, I'm worried about my son. He's drinking. It will come up through the course of that, but that's different. Do you guys get that? That's more of an intervention in the here and now than it is, let me tell you what happened in the past. And I would imagine that that's what you're going to be faced with. And this is a perfect example of it being almost impossible for you to affect change with your son unless you get her on board. You guys understand that part on who's closest to the person? You got to get them on board. We've talked a lot in here, how do you do that if they're not on board? And we've joked around and saying sometimes you got to do an intervention person. Information helps in that regard. Can they learn a little bit more about this? Understand what they're dealing with? A lot of people will initially chalk up, especially where alcohol is concerned. It's very easy as a society to chalk it up to, like, that's just what people do. Very easy to write that off. So sometimes people have to get education about that and get an understanding that it can be problematic. So let me talk a little bit more about why you may react the way you react, and just sort of kind of go into the way this works and how whenever you're worried and you're triggered and you get into that state, to try to be gentle with yourself and be kind to yourself. You almost can't avoid it. You almost can't avoid it. If you look at the brain, and we know more about the brain than we ever have before. This is really the 2000s have been called the decade of the brain, because before that psychology was always founded in theory. It didn't have a lot to do with studying things like neural pathways and actually looking at what happens in the brain when somebody undergoes trauma or when somebody's dealing with anxiety. And we're now in a time frame when that's becoming the norm. And so one of the areas are these things called neural pathways, and that's whenever cells fire between each other. And if they fire between each other enough, it's very simplistic, guys, but think of it as creating a road between those two cells, between that experience and that feeling, okay, or that thought and that feeling. It becomes a pathway in the classic sense. What's a pathway? If you're looking at a forest, the pathway is where you can walk and you can get to where you're going. So as you drive a neural pathway, it will become the default setting when you're triggered. It will become your go-to setting for any situation, because it's easier for the thought to go down the pathway than it is to plow a different pathway. Does that make sense? Have you ever gone skiing? It's very, like, you tend to ski in other people's. It kind of sucks, to tell you the truth. You want to go when there's powder. You want to go when it's fresh. But you tend to what? Ski in the same tracks that other people ski, because even if you don't want to, that's where your skis go. That's exactly what happens. Anybody here know what skiing is? Because we're in South Carolina. Okay, all right. So, we're big skiers where we're from, and so you're going down straight, and then all of a sudden you're drug into that. That is exactly what happens with the brain. So when you have these default settings of anxiety, or you have these default feelings of the worst case scenario, that's what's happening. It's actually called System 1 and System 2, and it's hard to see this particular diagram, but System 1 are the automatic thoughts that occur. They happen quickly. They happen a lot of times out of your realm of awareness. Some people talk about 95% of our thoughts are System 1 thoughts, where it's hot to the point you didn't even think about it. You just reacted. You just went with it. It's controlling you. System 2 is where we use our frontal cortex and we think things through. And if we're able to go to System 2, we tend to make better decisions in every area of life, guys. So this is, I'm on a diet and I'm doing really, really good, and I walk into the kitchen and there's powdered donuts in there. And I see them, and then what happens? Boom. I didn't think anything about it. I just grabbed the powdered donuts. I gobbled them up real quick. I got white powder all over my nose, which isn't good in a recovery center. Let me tell you a little bit of humor here. Come on. So that's because I went on automatic pilot. I didn't take a minute to think, do you really want to do that? Is that really where you want to go? How does it play out with you guys? You get the phone call or you don't get the phone call. You get the text and you wonder what it is. Or somebody says something, hey, I saw your daughter over at the bar or whatever. Whatever it is, and it happens before you can even grab it, the train leaves the station and parks itself in Catastrophe-ville. I just made that up right now. That's pretty good. It parks itself in worst case scenario. And you go to all the feelings associated with that. Now, again, it could be happening, but you see how it's taking control of you and it's sort of running the show. The good news is if you practice, you can plow new pathways. You can literally plow new pathways if you practice. But think about how hard it is to kind of create a road out of nothing. You know, if I said go over to, there's a forest across the street, go build a road. That would take a while, right? You'd have to cut down trees. You'd have to work really hard to clear everything out of the road. You would eventually get it done, but you'd have to do it over and over and over again. That's where people go wrong when it comes to redirecting some of this negative thinking and some of this anxiety, because I think they expect it to happen too fast. And when it doesn't happen immediately and they have no relief, or the relief isn't as intense enough, what do they do? What's a natural reaction? I tried it, so screw it. I'm not going to do that. And remember, your brain is always going to go back to what's the easiest and what's the most convenient. It's always going to go back to that pathway. They call it your default setting. Your default setting will always be that behavior. And this applies to a lot more than addiction, guys. This is just sort of this is what runs our life. This automatic thinking. Carol?
Which that's kind of what I do when I do that thing about it for my daughter. I used to think she'd be dead. If she was, they would have called me.
Yeah.
And that's my thought. They would have called me. They haven't called me, so she's not dead yet, or
Right.
she's alive, and that changed my feeling. And I did it over and over and over, so it became automatic.
And so that's you have to, how many times you have to do it? 1,000, 10,000, 153,000 times. Okay, over and over and over again. Have you ever noticed the opposite? Have you ever noticed someone? I've gone here, guys. I've had this happen in my life. Have you ever noticed how negativity can build on itself too? Do you ever see that phenomenon where it's kind of like, and it sort of becomes the default? I'll give you an example of where it can happen. It can happen a lot in workplaces where everybody's bitching and moaning. So everybody's bitching and moaning. So everybody's bitching and moaning. And the topic of conversation is how much the place sucks. Do you guys get it? And then it's just, that's the default. And then people who otherwise might be positive will fall into that. They'll fall right into the pathway as well. So again, this is where you have to, so what are the steps related to this? And I'm not going to get this right. Darn it, I should have looked it up. I apologize. I promise I'll get you this information next week, guys. This is some of the best work around this is being done with OCD. They're taking, well, I've taken what they've done with OCD, because there's a, what's OCD, guys? It's an obsessional thinking followed by a compulsive behavior. So my hands got germs, I got germs, I got to wash my hands. I wash my hands, I have a relief. Guys, it's one of the most intractable issues that a person can deal with. Intractable meaning hard to get rid of. Okay, and they've developed, at UCLA, they developed this program to deal with OCD. My idea is you could apply that same type of an approach to obsessional thinking around your loved one. The first step is obvious. It's awareness. You have to become aware that you're doing that. You have to become aware that you're going there, Carol. You have to become aware that whatever it is, whatever that repetitive issue is now on you. Now with OCD, that's very easy to point out to a lot of people. You know, it's I count the cracks when I walk across the floor, or I have to wash my hands repetitively. You guys are going to have to pick one, and you're going to have to say, like, what is that thing that gets me, okay? So that you can say this little phrase or whatever it would be is like, oh, there it is again. There it is again. You follow me? How that has to start the whole process. You can't do it if you aren't aware that there it is. So I'll just do it with obsessional thinking related to drinking. How about that? Because I'm in recovery, and in early recovery, you're obsessed to drink. Some people kind of get through it quicker than others, but for the most part, I spent, 18 years where alcohol was just part of the process. It's not going to go away. It's there, okay? And I had all these thoughts and cognitions associated with that. So the automatic thought, if I was at Whole Foods, because this still happens to this day, it doesn't bother me like this, but I'll walk by and I'll look at all these freaking like beers, all these different beers, and they're all named after like deers and in the woods, and like Elf Beer Brew 3817, Deerhead Stag. And I'll be like, wow, that's a beer now, okay? Because that wasn't the case back in the day when I was doing my thing. And so you walk by, you see that, all right, and boom, you're triggered. The automatic thought in the bad case is, man, that'd be nice. I'd love to get a hold of that. That'd be nice. Followed by this absolute obsession about getting a hold of it. That's what it's like whenever you first stop drinking. Do you guys get that? That's what the process can be like. So I would need to relabel that as okay, there it is. No, this isn't good. This isn't going to help anything. Reattribute is kind of like what you're talking about, Carol, where you kind of put a different label on it, or you put a different explanation on it. Refocus is very important in this process. In addition, the one thing you could add to your plan would be to get back into the present moment. So you refocus. So you go through, like, you want to drink. Oh, that hits you. Oh, there it is. No, that's not good. That's going to end bad. That's not going to be a positive thing. What we used to call play the tape the whole way through. Refocus would then be, what do I got to do right now? What's the next thing? Or what can I do to kind of alleviate my stress? Or is there anything else going on with me contributing to this? Do you follow that? That's an extremely important part of this step. It would be taking everything you do and then adding one other thing, saying, what else do I need to do to bring myself down?
Would it be as simple as to move to the next aisle in the grocery store?
It could be. Now, with OCD, a lot of times it's some type of self-soothing behavior to lower the anxiety. I would suspect with me, it would be moving to another aisle. I would suspect with family members, it would be a self-soothing behavior. Because what you're doing is you're trying to bring down your anxiety around this issue. So you now catch yourself. Self-soothing behaviors. What are self-soothing behaviors?
Exercise music.
Definitely. Also, when you talk about self-soothing behaviors, that's where you get into all the like hand lotion stuff. You get some hand lotion, put it on. Huff some candles, Cinnamon Toast Crunch candles, blueberry pie, whatever it is, reminds you of grandma's house, calms you down. Opposite action type behaviors where you know you're cranked up, so you listen to some music that has a certain tempo and beat to it that brings you down. Does that make sense? Maybe you watch a movie that sort of calms you down. You have something that you go to. We would recommend you find that thing. And I'm only half joking about the candle thing. A lot of people, that was their deal. I don't get it. I got to tell you something right now, that would aggravate the hell out of me. If I went and huffed a candle when I was upset, I probably would have been drinking 3318 Stag beer. Whatever it is that, because you might want to think about what would that be. What is the thing that you can do? Go for a walk, exercise, those are some of the standards. But what could you personally do that would take you down a couple notches? Does anybody have any ideas what would work for them?
Breathing.
So breathing is a big one. Do you guys hear that? Breathing, like literally like intentional breathing, paying attention. We've talked about box breathing, 4 across, 4 up, 4 across, 4 down, that kind of thing. Breathing's a really good one. What else could you do that's self-soothing? Think of the term self-soothing. It calms you. It calms you. It calms you. Whatever. Any, Carol?
Another thing that I used was my daily reader, either my Let Go Now book.
So that's not going to work in this situation.
Well, it would get my mind off of it. It would get my mind off of it for that moment.
Carol, that's not a self-soothing behavior. You can say it 17 more times, it'll still not be one. Okay, if it works for you, do it. No, but no, that's a distracting thing, and you should do it. So self-soothing is a very, very intentional, specific word. It literally means what can you do to make yourself feel better, like tactile sensations. Bring down every part of your emotion, every part of your body. That's why breathing is part of it, because it brings down your physiology. Carol, absolutely should do that if that works for you. But when you start thinking of self-soothing, that, yes.
Well, I quote verses in my head over and over
Yeah.
and over.
All right, so I can tell I'm not going to win this one. So you could absolutely quote verses. You could absolutely read and do the reader, and you should do that. In addition to that, I'm proposing that there's a whole other category of things called self-soothing. In addition to that, they're less cognitive. Does that make sense? They're more physical. They're less cognitive, more physical. They're more about other sensations. Music falls into this a lot. And it has to be the right type of music.
Make a cup of tea.
Having a cup of tea could.
Hot, it's hot.
One of the things that you're trying to do is think of yourself, let's pretend you're at an 8. It's called emotional arousal. And emotional arousal is not what you're thinking, it's what you're feeling. Have you ever determined, I feel frazzled? I just feel frazzled, or I feel tense. That's emotional arousal. That's beyond what you're thinking. You feel it in your body. You just feel like you're there. Self-soothing brings you down from that, from a physical standpoint. The thinking part is fine, but a physical standpoint. Exercise in the moment. Go for a walk. Maybe, again, do the aromatherapy. Some people will talk about, do you ever see those stress balls? That's what these stress balls are all about. You ever see those ones that you can roll around in your hands? Anybody have anything like that they do? Do not say, I read the Bible. Does anybody? Don't do it, Linda. Don't do it. Yeah. So does anybody have anything like that they do? Yoga. So, well, here's a good one. Pets tend to fall into that category. And getting the pet, getting the dog, come over, pet the dog, that kind of thing. Hug the cat, whatever it is. Do you guys get the idea? And so this is the thinking part. Okay? If you're so hell-bent on reading, this is where you do it. This is the bring yourself back to the moment, calm yourself down part. Okay? This is where you reward yourself for the successfully negotiating the situation. What you're doing is you're trying to set up a loop in your brain to combat this other negative loop. So revalue is, what you're revaluing is your new response to the situation. So how would you reward yourself for that situation?
Chocolate.
What's that?
Chocolate.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you reward yourself, you can reward yourself with chocolate. If that's something, you can reward yourself with you could say, if I do my best with this all week, I'm going and buying myself something. You start to connect the behavior, and your brain is now rewarding. Because remember, your brain is rewarding the old behavior too. What's the reward from the old behavior? What's the reward from the automatic response of worry? Or what's the reward, especially the reward from the automatic response of rescuing somebody? It relieves the anxiety, right? So that's why it's so powerful. You have to put something on the back end too. So reward yourself. Do something, be kind to yourself. Do something fun or get yourself something. Or even if it's just words of self-affirmation. Or you share this with somebody and they tell you, good job, you got through that. You have to close that loop in some other kind of way. Now, let's say you don't do all these. You don't have to do all these. What you probably have to do is the first one. Somehow, some way, you have to become aware of the fact that this is happening to you automatically. And we've already talked a little bit about how to do that. Pay attention to yourself. Pay attention to when you're getting upset. See if there are any patterns. See if there are any times of the day where this happens. If there's any specific issues that arise. And then you can even, if you become aware of it, I think you can do all kinds of things. I'm joking with Linda and Carol and talking about the reading part, but absolutely you could do that. Awareness really, truly is probably 90% of this issue. How do you become more aware? Anybody have any thoughts or success stories on how they became more aware of a self-destructive behavior or a self-destructive pattern? Mary Kay?
Well, coming here and listening and learning about everything, it made me start to question the things that I did. And one of the things that I used to do was to always call at night. Before I went to bed, I would try to call my son to get him to answer the phone, because in my mind I thought, if I hear his voice, then I know he's alive,
Yeah.
and I can go to sleep.
Right,
But
right.
then I learned that when I didn't hear his voice, that I was only setting myself up for just all kinds of worry.
So how did you
I quit
just
calling
by
him.
coming to places like this and hearing
And
about it? So
getting the support and knowing that I needed to recognize things that I was doing that maybe I could change.
so
I had no control over it. He wasn't going to answer that phone when I wanted him to answer that phone every day. So I just.
but you had to become aware of that.
Yes,
In order to become aware of that, you had to become educated on some things,
exactly.
and probably hearing other people talk about their
Yep.
situations also made you say, I do that.
Mhm.
Do you guys get that? Like, there's an awareness that comes from being in a group like this, because you're able to look around and say, okay, that's something I'm doing. How else can you become aware?
I think that through meditation, a lot of things bubble up for me. And
Meditation, yes.
that I become aware of.
Yes. What else? Yes.
Well, I was gonna say, my son used to call during the night, and I was always waking up 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, whatever, some kind of emergency every time it was something. And, the last time I think that I did that was when I went, after I talked to him, and I really couldn't solve whatever it was. And I went back to bed and I could actually feel my chest beating, my heart beating in my chest, and I said at that point, it's either me or him. And from that point, I put the phone in the kitchen. I just said I could not answer it anymore.
So do you guys see what's happening? So for some of you, it's an event. That's a situation. It's almost, we don't use the word hit bottom, but it's almost like you hit bottom with this circumstance.
Right.
And you said, I'm not doing this anymore, related to this issue, and I'm not going to let this isn't going to control me anymore. Do you feel like after that point you were able to pay attention and you were able to catch yourself better?
Like I said, I put the phone in the other room, and I just made it a point to take care of me at that point, that I knew I wasn't going to, I wanted him to learn that I wasn't going to pick that phone up during the night.
Yeah.
So he could call somebody else, but I wasn't going to pick
So
it up.
the cool thing is, if you listen to people, you guys figure out a solution. Like, I don't know, people a lot of times come and say, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? Actually, it's interesting. You guys figure out the what do you do part. It's the how do you do it, and how do you even become aware you need to do it. Like, you solved the problem by moving the phone. Mary Kay solved the problem by stopping. I didn't tell you to do that. Maybe I did. Did I?
No.
Oh, gee.
Sorry.
Yeah, but and Carol, you changed some of this stuff, the self-talk around your daughter, Not specifically like you got an instructional manual. Do you guys get that? It's not about an instructional manual. I think you can figure out the nuts and bolts of it if you figure out what it is that's running the show. Yes.
But what's really important for me too is that when I was able to do a small thing like that, which really was big, and I could come here, I got the recognition that helped me keep it up.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, that's a good
because
point.
I couldn't tell that to just a friend who never
Yeah.
went through it, because they'd be like, well, hell, I never call. Don't answer the phone.
Right.
You know, so
Right.
coming and talking to the people that have walked in my shoes and know where I am, and, you know, would give me that support, like, keep it up, that's really good that you're taking care of yourself. That's what was really important.
And so once you recognize it, you can probably work for a solution. Yes, sir.
There's a gentleman who has a stepson who's heavily addicted, and he's kind of a country philosopher. He has come up with, you know, we usually say, don't just sit there, do something. He's turned it around and he says, don't just do something, sit there.
Yes.
And quite often when the kid calls, the answer is, well, let me think about it, I'll get back to you.
Delaying it is a great idea. Yeah. Pausing the situation. I'll get back to you. I can't answer that right now. That's a great idea. A fantastic idea. You're literally slowing your mind down a little bit. You can work backward as well. One other way to kind of, most of the time you're going to figure out what the pattern is. I'll be honest with you. Once you start examining things, you're going to find out this is the bad time of the day. This is the situation that gets me going every time at nighttime when the phone rings, or on the weekends whenever he goes out and doesn't come in. You're going to figure this out. Sometimes people will say, I can't, I really don't, I feel like, my life is falling apart, my relationships are falling apart, but I can't put my finger on what's going on. You can also work backward from any given incident and try to target the underlying thought or the underlying thing that triggered the whole incident. Does that make sense? What do I mean by any given incident? Let's say that it's a less obvious situation. So, because here's what I believe, that as this thing progresses for family members, and you deal more and more from this, the things that get you become more and more subtle. They start to show up in different ways, and it's not always the obvious stuff like the phone call at night. It tends to be more about your relationship with your spouse and how you guys are getting along. It tends to be more about your relationship with other people. It tends to start to affect your work life. It moves from the obvious to other things, unless you kind of stay in your family recovery program. Does that make sense? All right, so let's say that the issue is, I don't know what's going on since this has started to happen. We feel like we had it together. We felt like we were doing great, but over the last 3 months we're fighting just like cats and dogs, and our relationship is starting to suffer. And we've been dealing with this for 6 years. I don't know why this would be a problem. Do you guys get that? I used to hear this all the time when I did couples counseling. We've been dealing with this for 6 years. Why would this be a problem now? So, you go from the incident and you literally go back and you ask questions like, so what was happening an hour before that? Well, what happened earlier in the day? What happened at lunchtime? What was going on when you woke up in the morning? And what you're looking for is a pattern around those incidents that might lead to the awareness issue. That might lead to, because if you don't know what it is that's causing it or why you're popping off, it's very hard to figure out what to do about it. You guys get that?
Yeah.
So an example would be, me in my current situation with what I'm dealing with personally, where my family is in Pennsylvania and I'm here in South Carolina. And, it doesn't have anything to do with addiction or substance use. This is just life. Life shows up. My son's up there. He was getting procedures. My kids are in school. The good news is school is going great. The bad news is school is going great. Right? So now I'm stuck with this situation on what do we do? So that's the underlying issue, or that's the context for this. So I go up there, and I'm in this circumstance where, like every Sunday or Wednesday or whenever I'm coming back, my wife and I are scrapping. Do you know what I mean? I know none of you guys fight with your husband or wife, but if you did, sometimes you disagree. Sometimes you have differences of opinion. Sometimes it gets a little bit heated, that kind of thing. So this has happened to us week after week after week. And in my mind, I'm going, it's me having to drive back to South Carolina, and you know, I hate to drive, and that's my explanation for it, and I'm just grumpy, and that's her explanation for it, and that's just how we're kind of focusing on it and getting through it. But what happens is if you back that off, man, and I'm telling you, we did this. If you back that off, and you back that off, every single time we fought, it was after a conversation with my son Isaac. And in the conversation with my son Isaac, he always got tearful. Okay? Well, I was giving him, you know, hey, this is how it is right now. This is not forever. We're going to get this figured out. And he would get jammed up. Because he should get jammed up. He's 11. I'm here. That kind of thing. He doesn't get it. He doesn't understand. And I say things like, well, quantitatively, if I come up for 10 days a month because I got some vacation time, technically that's just as much time. And it'll also be qualitative. It'll be better quality because that doesn't work. Okay? Every single time we have scrapped, it's been after one of those conversations. So I'm going around saying to myself, it's about work. She's going around saying it's about work. What's it actually about? Guilt. It's about guilt. And it's about frustration and fear. Do you guys follow this? Fear of what? Fear of, I don't know, all of that. Fear of what went on with my son Aiden. All those feelings. So now that I know what it is, I can problem solve in the right way. I can now start to figure this out and start talking about it and be aware of this, and it won't go down again. I'm telling you right now, it won't go down. My wife and I, we know our way around this shit. We just know our way around this. We have a long and storied history of having to figure stuff out. And that particular issue will not come up again. The reason is because for the first time in like 4 months, I've actually figured out what the heck it is, and I'm going to problem solve it with Isaac. And we're going to, and we figured it out. I actually think he and I figured it out. Do you want to hear what the solution is? Okay, so the solution is twofold. There are these virtual reality goggles that you can get, okay? And I apparently can basically be in the room with him. The second thing, and the more interesting thing, is I can't remember the video game, but I can get a video game account and play the video game with him. Literally, I'll be on the screen as a character. He'll be on the screen as a character. He's over-frickin' joyed with this situation, okay? So now that's problem solving because I actually knew what the target was. Does that make sense? If I go about my own business and I tell myself, here's what it is, so how do I problem solve? If I think it is that I'm grumpy on Sunday because I have to drive back, I'll problem solve that in a whole different way. Does that make sense? It'll be like, well, I'm going to leave Saturday night, or I'm going to fly. That'll take care of it. But that's not actually going to take care of it. So how do you get to that? You got to walk back, man. And sometimes there'll be a pattern and sometimes there won't. You know, sometimes it'll be obvious like that. Many times it won't. But do you guys get the general idea? Very hard to solve a problem if you don't know what the problem is. Have you ever felt like you tried to solve a problem and it was just like you were solving problem after problem after problem, but the actual problem wasn't going away and it was still kind of like manifesting itself? To a certain degree, that's the story with addiction, right? We try to solve all these other issues for our loved one. We try to get all this other help. We call it all these other things. We think it's, you know, maybe it's just the school that the person's in, or maybe it's a mental health issue. And don't get me wrong, this stuff can contribute, but we have trouble actually looking at the target, which is this person's becoming addicted. So walk it back. And they call that a behavioral chain analysis is what that's called. And it's a technique used in dialectical behavioral therapy. And it's literally, Carol, when did this incident occur? You know, when I went to the reception, when I went to my doctor's office, and you know, the next thing I know, I was in there, and he didn't give me the right medication, and I lost my mind. Well, can you tell me what was going on when you were in the lobby? And they talk you through it, and there's stuff like that. What was going on? Do you remember the car ride over? And many times, somebody will be like, "That's where it started. That's where the thing happened. That's where the thing unconsciously set in motion this process." Does anybody have anything that they would share related to that they've gone through that would be similar? Yes?
I often get into a situation where I'm dealing with somebody and they actually tell me the reason we're having this problem is you're being too sensitive, or you're doing this, or you're not. I mean, I have a tendency to be wound up, okay, so you're too sensitive, or you're wound up, or what's the other one they use on me?
You're overreacting.
You're overreacting.
Yeah, all that stuff, yeah.
So the next round goes, and I try to correct it, and so my tendency, okay, I'm getting this list of things, let me do the polar opposite of what it is, and I do the opposite, I overcorrect, and I'm just chilled out, you know, instead of, if they don't, like she was talking about, you don't get a phone call. The first thing I would do would call,
Yeah.
and tell, okay, that's not working. All right, well, let me try this. I'll just do the opposite. I won't
Swing it the other
call.
way,
I
yeah.
won't call. And I always find I'm in a situation where, you know, I get the same result. It's like, they tell me, the person tells me, well, the reason I didn't call you is you didn't call me. And then it's like, well, I got annoyed that you were blowing up my phone. So it's like, I'm damned if I do, and if I do the opposite, I'm damned if I don't.
Yeah, so-
That's a very frustrating.
No, it is very frustrating. And you got to remember, like, what I'm talking about isn't going to necessarily, that's a very specific kind of circumstance that I'm talking about. There's a pattern to it. It's related to a certain time frame. You know, sometimes you won't be able to figure it out. It'll be other communication issues or other things that are going on. And so you don't want to apply this to every single situation, but if you feel like there's something happening more than once, more than twice, 10, 15, you know what I mean by a pattern? How are we here again? Why is this happening again? Then that's where, now if it's communication, it's a whole different deal. If it's like you say blue and she says red, you say up and they say down, now you're talking about a whole different deal. It's not always because something else is going on and eating your lunch. I feel like this issue of getting in touch with what's like running the show, and in my case, this idea of guilt or whatever, it's the key to managing your emotions. It's also one of the most difficult things to do, and what's interesting is just because you get it in control over here with this one thing, it's not like it isn't going to pop up over here. So it isn't a solution to everything. There'll be something else going on. I mean, we'll be fighting every Sunday because, I don't know, the Pittsburgh Penguins aren't doing too well right now. Whatever it may be. Did you have your hand up?
Yes, I did. With our situation, you know, you think it's getting old. We're doing something that will help, or the extended family is going to help. He's here, one of our addicts is here in South Carolina now with his mother in a room. His family is up north, and so on. There's nothing, he won't really speak to us. The family came for Thanksgiving. He wouldn't go, so his mom stayed. This is my stepson, Gary's son. And so what's happening is we don't have any control over the situation. We don't have control over how anybody else is relating to him. And it's just getting worse. And the children, we're trying to contact them, make sure they're okay. They're without a grandparent. Terrible. But what happens with my husband and I is that because he can't control, he's controlling me or critical or looking at everything and finding out what's wrong with the world, picking out negative things all the time, and it's hard.
So you understand what's going on in a situation like that, guys. Whether it's those specifics, and it happens to all of us. It's a coping is what that would be. That's a way of coping with an absolute unacceptable fear, is what's going on here. It's the only way we know. It's a survival mechanism, to be perfectly honest with you. What does it do when you do that? So you guys have heard the term defense mechanisms, right? So defense mechanisms, what are they? Denial, rationalization, justification, intellectualization, minimization, those type of things. Defense mechanisms also take on other forms, and it can be lashing out, can be a defense mechanism. Defense mechanisms exist to keep us from feeling emotional pain. Does that make sense? It's literally our brain's subconscious effort to say, don't go there, don't go there, don't go there. So if I'm critical of everything or controlling of everything, I'm not going there. Whereas there, oh my God, I'm scared to death, my son's going to die. Yes?
Just adding to that, it's an interesting dynamic. I'll make it short, but if you talk to a policeman, he'll probably tell you that they'll get calls from a woman, my husband or my wife, whatever, is doing something. They come in, they try to cuff him, and then the woman jumps on the policeman. I can say something negative about my son. If my wife, who's his stepmother, says something negative, somehow I don't internalize it very well. Just say, that's a polite way of saying it.
Yeah.
I can do it. He's my kid.
Yeah.
Somehow somebody else says it does bother you. No, I'm not saying she does, but if anybody else does.
Why not? Why wouldn't you?
Yeah,
Wait. Why would you not say anything negative about him?
we both.
I mean, I would. Seriously.
Yeah, I mean.
Who in the world doesn't say something negative about their addicted loved one? You might want to start saying some negative stuff. Because it's negative stuff. Do you guys get it? It's not, you don't have to go about this acting like it's okay. What you want to do is you don't want to get into a pattern, and you don't want to do it directly to the person, because what happens then? It becomes very, very self-destructive, and you want to back off when you can, and you want to cry. You should cry. And everyone else in here who's dealing with this should cry. And to your point early on that kind of got this going, there is no good way to deal with it if you want to be honest. It's ugly as can be. When my daughter went through what she went through, I was thinking about that the other day. And I was thinking about how much I had to do to manage that situation. I haven't talked about that a lot in here, but I know my way around these circumstances, right? I know the people who need to be talked to, and I know what needs to be filled out, and how much I had to manage that, and how in between managing it, all I did was cry. If I wasn't dealing with that issue, if I wasn't over at the hospital or over at Carolina dealing with that issue, I was crying. And I don't know how to do it other than that. I don't know how I could rewind that clock and do it other than that. My wife's experience is super interesting from a psychological point of view, which I bet she's very glad I'm talking about like that. She didn't crash until about 6 weeks ago, because she dealt with these other incidents. I don't know if you guys know the story, but my daughter, then her brother dies. He's 52 years old. He has a heart attack. He dies. She goes to Pennsylvania to help her mom through that. My son, Aiden, has this breathing episode, and winds up in University of Pittsburgh Children's Hospital. He couldn't breathe. He had to be intubated, and he had to be put in like I don't know what you want to call it, like sedated, and he was out, drug-induced coma or something. I don't know what you want to call that. And she dealt with all that, and then she dealt with all the appointments afterward, and negotiated all that. So what's happening while you're doing that is you're actively engaged. And then finally, we sort of got the clean bill of health, not completely, but we sort of did. And then what happened? Boom. Boom. And so you got to be kind to one another. You've got to be kind to one another, and you got to do the best you can with this, and you have to understand that this thing is relentless. People do get better. You can get better regardless of what's going on with your loved one. And we will continue to do this, and we will continue to do these type of groups, and we will talk. Every week I'm here, we're going to do it like this, where we talk about these type of options. We'll share ideas, and we'll try to get through it, and to the best of our ability, right? But you're allowed to have a bad day. Okay? Just don't have too many in a row, because we'll have to send the special favor police over to get you. Yes?
I'm just gonna make a comment. I went and saw that movie that's out now called Beautiful Boy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about addiction. I don't know if anybody else has saw it or not, but when I watched it, I could almost tell in the movie what was gonna happen next. And I've been coming here about 3 years, and you see people come in the door, and everybody pretty much follows the same pattern. When they steal from you, all this stuff your person is doing we see the people doing the same things to their loved ones. And it's just frustrating because they say it's a disease, but yet, I can see the patterns where pretty much the people are doing the same thing to their parents and everything, and it's like, there's no answer. And I
Well,
guess it's all to do with the brain.
But
you
there,
know, and
so,
different people react to different things.
Yeah, you're
but
right.
it's
There's
frustrating.
there's a very like clear trajectory on a lot of this stuff that a lot of people fall into. I do think that we have to stick to the facts that people do get better, and they tend to get better as they get older. If you look at the statistics, as you get older, you tend to get better. You know, and that continues the whole, no matter what age you are, and the reason for that is logical, right? As you get older, you get a little more tired. It's a little easier to do recovery. Running around like a maniac is a little bit less attractive to a 50-year-old than it is to a 22-year-old, okay? So the outcomes get better as a person. The problem we're dealing with right now, as we try to like look at a new approach, are these dangerous drugs that are here. I'm telling you, we would have the framework for a much better way of going about this if we didn't have these drugs that have escalated the issue. Because I believe the framework is that we educate families, we work with families, and we start to think about progress over perfection, and we continuously push the person back toward recovery over and over again with the family. But you guys, it's very hard to do that when it's the level that it is right now. There's going to have to be a medicine. There's going to have to be some type of medicine that protects the person through this process. Do you follow me? Some type of medicine will have to be given on a pretty wide scale so that by we, I mean places like FAVOR Greenville, technology, whatever it takes, we can pull the person along, but they have to be able to stay alive. That's what has to happen. So, all right, guys, so that's outstanding. Thank you for being here tonight. We will be... All right. All right, guys, so out on the table out there are some cards if you have any questions and things like that. I'm absolutely incapable of talking. Seriously, I talked all day. And, I don't know what day of the week it is right now.
We gotta go buy toilet paper.
Good. Oh, I forgot to do the sign-in sheet.